I'm going to share my screen. We'll start in a couple minutes, but as you can see from the post, it's a pretty big note day. All right, it's a pretty big note day, so you're gonna have two notes things that should be able. You have a note catcher that I shared in a Google Doc, and also you'll have a notebook that you should have out as well. Pretty much all you're gonna do is post your notes. Yeah, what do you mean? From what topics? Oh, sorry. Lesson 18. So if you click on lesson 18, it should pop up there. You're going to have a choice, Aura. So I guess we have plenty of people here. Let's just start. Okay, so let me share this here. Give me 1 second. Not that. Let's go here. So there's not really, I'll put the focus question in the chat because I didn't write it on the PowerPoint like I usually do. So what are the major roles of the three branches of government? There you go. So the focus question is there. All right. So I shared. All right. So I shared this as well. So this is a note catcher. This would be a helpful thing to do most of the notes on. I don't know if you could put all of the notes we take today on here. But if you want to use this is fine. Or if you just want to write everything in your notebook, it's fine. Whatever you hand in, if you want to do it on both, it's fine too. I don't really care. Just make sure you get all the notes down because we're going to really take our time and go through how our federal government kind of works at this point. So if you're noticing, I kind of help you out with the major roles, the major checks for each branch. I put them on the left here to kind of help you out. And we'll go through certain things. All right. So if you're looking through, let's go back to this. If you're looking through the structure of the Constitution, we're going to really dive in again to Articles 1, 2, and 3 and really go down through each branch of government and what they are responsible for at this particular point in time. Okay, so let's start with the legislative branch because the intention, if you guys remember, I think it was Gentiana who said it, that the legislative branch, the role and the thought was for it to be the most powerful. So we're going to start with that one. And it's also another reason why they put it as the first article in the Constitution. The intention was it to be the most powerful. All right, so let's go over a couple things. It's led by Congress. There is officially 535 members in the Congress as we have today. Back in history, it was a lot less because we had less representation and less states. But now today, there's 535 representatives in our Congress. 100 of them are in the Senate, and 435 of them are in the House of Representatives. Okay? So we're going to start on the left here. All right, let's look at the major roles and the major checks. And I actually want to take our time and go over how a law is passed because the most major role for the legislative branch, and this is something you probably remember from 7th grade, is they make and vote on new laws. Legislature or legislative is another word for law. So our legislative branch and their focus in our government is to make and create laws and to make sure that everyone has laws, so they're not enforcing the laws, but they're the ones to make sure that laws are put in place. Now, they do a lot of other things, but that is their major role. So if you ever turned on a news channel called C-SPAN, they're always going to be filming, what happens in the House of Representatives to keep it public record. But essentially, they're talking about and debating and voting on laws. All right, that is the biggest thing. All right. Navaya, you do not need to copy down only what's in red. You kind of need to copy down everything because you need to know the major roles and the major checks, and that can go into the Google Doc, or you could just make a T-chart in your notebook, so whatever's fine. So you're not copying down just what's in red for this. So the legislative branch, they're going to vote and make new laws. Another huge role that they have, and it plays a large portion early on in our country, is the legislative branch has the power to declare war. Now, back during American history, they were the only branch of government that could declare war technically. Now, technically, the executive branch and the president can, though they're not going to ever declare an official war, but you can go to war, as you'll learn, without declaring war. This is a new thing that has happened ever since, I believe, the first war would have been Vietnam War? No, excuse me, the Korean War. So this is a relatively new thing in American history, but technically speaking, only the legislative branch is able to declare war. A huge thing years ago when Trump was elected was a lot of people were fearful that since he's a very boisterous persona, that his persona would lead to a war. And I remember I had to remind certain students at that time, like, he has a boisterous personality, but the executive branch can't declare war. So you have to get that from the legislative branch. So that's something that is very tough to do. All right. The legislative branch is also in control of our purse or in control of the money. Every time we need money or every time we want to create a program, it has to be approved by the legislative branch. So if you want to make college free, okay, which can happen maybe in the future, if you want to make college free, it has to get approved by the legislative branch because college ain't technically free. It costs money, but it's money that the government's going to pay for and taxpayers are going to pay for. So whenever you have a program like that that's going to cost money, you have to get it approved by the legislative branch. Okay, so that's another major thing that they do. So they're voting on laws. They're controlling the money in our country. And the last thing, if we do go to a war, they're able to ratify a treaty, or in some cases, some other things dealing with land. But essentially, they're the ones that are able to approve and end wars. Okay. So last week on Friday, we did the checks and balances as well. So we saw some of those major roles. What are some of the major checks that they have? The legislative branch has the most checking power in our country. And again, the intention was, since our people are making up. I'm lagging too much? Oh boy. You guys can't hear? Everyone else okay? Okay, all right. So Aura, why don't you just take a second and leave the chat and come right back to the Google Meet. Maybe it's something on your end. But if everyone else, a couple of people say I'm lagging. I'm at home, so you guys see that. So my internet's probably not as great as like the school Wi-Fi. But again, this will be on YouTube, so if anything is missed, then it's fine. All right, so hopefully we do a little bit better than what we're doing. I mean, I'm literally right next to my Wi-Fi, so I'd imagine everything's fine. So anyway, some of the major checks at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, is the legislative branch has the power to impeach the president. And what that means is the president can be put on trial. So this is a check on the executive branch. If the president is doing something that is illegal or not, is committing some type of high crime, the legislative branch can put the president on trial. And if the legislative branch votes to get rid of the president, both the Senate and the House, then we can remove the president. Okay? Another major check is when the president, as you're going to learn, they're able to appoint Supreme Court justices. They are able to reject or approve Supreme Court nominations if they feel like the Supreme Court nominee is not doing the right thing. Right now, there's actually one going on right now. The president in current events terms, nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court the last couple of weeks. And the legislative branch and the Senate and the House are basically going through and approving if this judicial branch nominee, Supreme Court nominee, is correct and good. So they'll vote on that soon. All right. And the last thing is we'll talk about the veto power of the president soon, but they can override a veto. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going back to the part on the red here. Laws are not simply made out of nowhere, and you're going to notice they take a lot of time. So what's going to happen is there's a long process of how something becomes a law. But the first step is you have to propose what's called a bill. Now, technically speaking, after 1913, if you guys wanted to propose a bill, you could. If you wanted to propose a bill and try and make a law, anyone technically can. Now, back in history, usually the biggest people to propose bills were the president and were the people in the legislative branch. Okay? But a bill is a proposed law that is yet to be approved by Congress. There's a lot of bills get proposed, very few become laws. All right, but it's the legislative branch's job to kind of go through that and make sure that the bills kind of come into play. So what you're going to do in your notebook, okay, or you could do it in the legislative branch box, up to you, in your Google Doc. We're going to go through and we want to come up with the 4 or 5 steps to making a bill into a law. Okay? So let's first start with the House of Representatives. Okay? Each district, and there's 435 districts in our country. Okay? Some states will only have 1 district because their states are so small. Some states like New York will have, I think, 29 districts. Okay? Depending on your population. All right? So the most general thing is if you wanted to propose a law, you need to write a bill and send it to your congressman or congresswoman. So in your case, the person in the Bronx that is your congresswoman is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a pretty famous congresswoman. She's controversial, but she's pretty famous. She's young, but she is your congresswoman. So if you wanted to write a bill to her, she could read it or her group could read it. And then if she likes it, she could then maybe propose it to her House of Representatives to see if it becomes a federal law, though it does take a long time to go through. All right, so let's go through this, how a bill becomes a law. I'm going to share this screen. All right, we're going to watch this video, and we're going to try and come up with the 4 or 5 steps that comes up. So keep an eye on the chat so we can fill that in as time goes on.
They turned you down? I don't think robots can actually become U.S. citizens. I don't know. I just don't think it's ever come up. Dear Tim and Moby, how does the U.S. Congress pass laws? From Mo. It's a long process. Every law in America starts out the same way, though, as an idea. Lots of these ideas come from senators and representatives in Congress, but some of them start with regular people who have no connection to politics. These people write to their local representative or senator explaining their idea. The congressperson will then decide if the idea is a good one or a bad one. If the congressperson doesn't like the idea, it could end right there. Or, if they like the idea, they may decide to sponsor it. That just means that they'll introduce the idea in Congress as a bill and speak out in favor of it. A bill is a document that explains how such a law would work. Bills can be introduced in either the Senate or the House of Representatives. For a bill to become a law, it must first pass through a committee. Committees are groups of congressmen and women who specialize in certain types of laws. The committee discusses the bill and votes on it, yea for yes and nay for no. If approved, the bill is then sent to a full House of Congress.
Okay, so let me explain that. So within Congress, and this should make sense, since you have 535 people, 100 in the Senate, 435 in the House of Representatives, you want to make sure that you have congressmen or women that are experts in certain fields. So there's going to be committees on a lot of different issues. So like education issues, what else? Agricultural issues, foreign policy, working with other countries. And it's going to be made about 10 to 12 people. So if you want to make a law dealing with, let's do something stupid, but just something that maybe you could relate to. Let's say you propose a bill saying that no school should start before 10 a.m. because kids need to sleep. And let's say you send it to Ocasio-Cortez, your congresswoman, and she approves it. She says, okay, this is a good idea. She's going to go to her education committee. And this education committee is only 10 people. All right. That bill has to be read to the education committee, and that group is going to decide, you know what, we're going to basically figure out and see if this is good. Okay. So step 2 is getting the bill approved in a small committee of Congress. I'll put 10 to 12 people. And that's step 2. All right, so those are the first 2 major steps. If you can get through those first 2 things, your bill or the bill that's being talked about will be talked about in a full House of Congress. Remember, we're a bicameral legislature. We have 2 houses. So let's say this bill went to the House of Representatives, and then it passes the committee. We're now going to discuss it in the entire House of Representatives. So let's see what happens here.
The full House then discusses, debates, and votes on the bill. If more than half of the congresspersons vote in favor of the bill, it'll pass on to the other house. That means that in the House of Representatives, with 435 members, 218 of them have to vote yay. If the bill begins in the Senate, with 100 members, 51 of them must vote yay. If a bill doesn't pass this first vote, it's often thrown out for good. But lots of times it'll be sent back to the committee it came from to see if they can fix it. That's right, there are tons of opportunities for a bill to be thrown out before it ever becomes a law. So, once a bill passes the vote in one House of Congress, it goes to the other one for the same process: committee, discussion, debate, and vote. If the bill passes both the House and the Senate, it goes to the President. The President can decide to either sign the bill, at which point it becomes a law.
There's only 2 houses, all right, but they're kind of showing you something here. So this is number 3, step 3. Half of one house needs to vote on approving the bill. So let's say the House of Representatives gets it first. Okay, they vote on it. They get 240 votes. That would be enough to get it through the House of Representatives. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to send that bill, okay, over to the Senate. And I just want to say one thing. If the House of Representatives gets it and they deny the bill, that's it. It doesn't become a law. But it does pass the House. Now they're going to send that same bill over to the Senate. They're going to send it over to their education committee. Their education committee is going to vote. And if they don't vote to pass it, the bill is not becoming a law. But let's say they do vote to pass it, then it goes to the Senate. Let's say 60 people vote yes in the Senate. That's more than half. That means eventually it's going to become approved in both the House and the Senate. There's 1 more or 2 more things that need to happen. Okay, 4. So the other house has to vote to approve. So leads it to the last step. It now goes to the executive branch. This is one of the checks and balances we were talking about, right? Because the legislative branch, they put their thoughts forward. Guess what now? Now it goes to the president. So we have a different branch getting involved to see if this bill is going to become a law.
A law. Or if he doesn't like the bill, the president can veto it. Once the bill is vetoed, it goes back to Congress. Each House of Congress can then decide whether it wants to change the bill, abandon the bill, or override the president's veto. If 2/3 of each House votes to override, the bill becomes law, despite the president's veto. In the House of Representatives, that means 290 votes out of 435. In the Senate, it's 67 out of 100. It's a tough vote to get. Hey Moby, don't feel so bad. Each year Congress looks at thousands of bills and only approves a few of them. Well, it does seem complicated, and it is. But that's the whole point. We don't want laws passed whenever someone feels like it. That would be dangerous. The process by which a bill becomes a law is long and involved to ensure that the laws are only made after they've been carefully considered, and when a lot of people think it's the right thing to do. What are you working on now? I really have to remember to stop encouraging you.
Okay, so the last thing is the president can sign or veto a law. Okay. If they veto a law, that could mean the end of the bill. So that means it could pass the House of Representatives, it could pass the Senate. If the president doesn't like it, they could veto it. Now, the president generally doesn't veto laws. They have the power to. It does happen. And if the president does veto a law, what eventually the House of Representatives and the Senate can do is they can re-vote on the law. And if they go from having half of the support to 2/3 support, they can override the veto. And that's very tough to do, but it can happen. So let's say this can happen, right? The Congress passes a law that the president doesn't like because it goes against something the president wants, right? And the president vetoes it. But the House really wants it, the Senate really wants it, they can override the veto. So again, this shows you that the legislative branch probably has the most power when it's all said and done. Okay? Any questions so far? All right, we're going on to number 2. Okay, we're going into Article 2, and we're going into the next branch of government, and that is the judicial branch. Okay, and for my students that don't like taking notes, and I apologize because this is one of those days. This is just an old school nitty gritty. We gotta like learn the branches type of thing, and this is kind of how we do it. So this is like kind of getting some information because these branches come up a lot later on. Okay, so let's first start here on the right. Okay. Who's the judicial branch led by? Well, the judicial branch is led by the Supreme Court, and the intention of the founders when they wrote the Constitution was to have the judicial branch to be the most important. It should be now. Never popped over. Take a look. See if it popped over now. Is that good? Yeah, maybe my internet just took forever to switch over. Sorry. I hit it like 30, 40 seconds ago. All right. So the judicial branch is led by the Supreme Court. And let's essentially go over why the Supreme Court is meant to be one of the least powerful of the 3 branches. But over time, it's gotten a lot more power, and we'll talk about why. So the 2 main goals of the judicial branch is, first thing is this term constitutional or unconstitutional. Let's just kind of go over it quick. If something's constitutional, it's another way for saying that something is legal because that is the correct interpretation of the Constitution. So if it's something written in the Constitution, it's something that the Constitution and the Founding Fathers intended, that's another word for legal. Okay? So I often use constitutional and legal in the same breath, and I'll also say unconstitutional and illegal in the same breath. Okay? But essentially what they're saying is if something is constitutional or unconstitutional, if it's legal or illegal. And that's the judicial branch's job. So they're going to look at laws. They're going to look at situations that happen, right? They're going to look at what the president does. They're going to look at what the legislative branch does. They're going to look at what Congress does. And they're going to say, is this action legal or illegal? I mean, this is what courts do. This shouldn't be much of a surprise. But specifically, the judicial branch is focusing on how how laws are meant to be interpreted, legal or not, or how actions in the government are meant to be legal or not. Now, this thing goes off to a little bit, what I'm going to say is a little confusing. Originally, the intention was for only the judicial branch to judge laws to be constitutional or not. They had very little check on the executive branch, and that will change over time. So I'll come back to this a little bit later on when we get to Unit 2. Okay? The other major thing that they're able to do is we have a court system where you could do something called an appeal. Does anyone know, if you want to write in the chat, what it means to appeal something? If you were to make an appeal, my baseball fans might know what an appeal is. They point to the other umpires sometimes. Does anyone know what an appeal is? Okay. Yeah, when you go to trial again, yeah, kind of. So let's say you're unhappy. Let's say you have your Sixth and Seventh Amendment rights, okay? You go to trial and you lose that trial. You're found guilty, okay? If you are unhappy with that decision, which many people would be, you can go on an appeal. So you can go to another higher court. So we have a court system that, very similar to federalism, has levels, okay? You have lower courts, okay, where you have like basic stuff, but as you get into more serious crimes, you go to higher and higher courts. The Supreme Court is supreme. It's the highest court in our country. So the Supreme Court's going to decide, finally, if there is an issue that's very controversial and they take on a court case, they can basically make the final court decision where it's going to become the precedent and the law for the rest of the country. And I shouldn't say the word law, but it's going to become the example of the entire country. If you know what segregation is, segregation was never a federal law until the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was okay, which was a huge mistake by the Supreme Court at the time. But it was never a federal law. It was never passed through our Congress. So it was something that our Supreme Court decided on. Another controversial one would be abortion. Abortion was never a federal law that was made legal. It was made legal technically by the Supreme Court. Okay? Yeah, rejoin. If everyone else can hear me, I'm just going to keep going. I don't know what's going on. Some of the internet issues today. I guess that's what will happen. Okay? The major check that the judicial branch does, okay, perfect, Josh, is that they can declare laws or executive actions unconstitutional. So if there is a law that is not fair, so to speak, okay, or if it's not legal, they could declare the law unconstitutional and the law is thrown out. If the president, the biggest one I can kind of think of, and it was never the Supreme Court that did it, but this is a good example. Trump, a couple of years ago, had a travel ban on certain countries, and one of the courts ruled it unconstitutional. Now, it wasn't the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court eventually said that it was legal, but a court can rule something like the president does, or a member in the Senate, or a member in the House of Representatives done, is unconstitutional. Okay, what you're going to learn, I want to do a little exercise right now. It shouldn't take too long. There are some very gray areas, and that's the best thing that I could say. There are some gray areas when laws are made that interpreting laws can be tough. All right, so in the chat, you're going to use the chat as the example here to kind of go over and tell me if a law is fair or not. I think you did this with maybe DeMasi last year, so we're going to do this exercise again. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question. Okay, we're going to go 5 scenarios. I'm going to start with a very basic thing. All right, in the Bronx, at the top, you don't need to write this, you're just listening. In the Bronx, you are not allowed to murder another human being. I mean, that's a law. I think everyone knows that that is a law. All right, but certain scenarios can make things a little bit confusing. It's the job of the judicial branch to really decide if a law was broken or not. Okay, if it was constitutional or unconstitutional. So John found out his girlfriend was cheating on him with his best friend Mike. Enraged from this, John beats up Mike so bad that he accidentally kills Mike after hitting him in the head too many times. So in the chat, okay, write yes if you think this law, this scenario where John should be found guilty of this crime if he broke the law, or no, he did not break the law. So yes, got a bunch of yeses. Okay, so in this case, John was very upset and enraged, and he killed Mike. So this seems like something that is most likely murder. The only thing is, this may be something called manslaughter, but essentially, this is a pretty clear-cut situation. Let's try another one. In the Bronx, you're not allowed to murder another human being. This is a very similar situation. An invader comes into Maggie's home trying to steal a TV. Maggie shoots and kills the invader. Is this murder or no? You got some no's. Well, he's just stealing a TV, right? Oh, self-defense. Okay. So it's a little bit tricky. Okay. Now, this is one of those situations where if the invader comes in and doesn't have a weapon and you shoot them, this could become tricky. But he's in her house. All right. So this scenario, a little different. Let's try this one.
In her private home.
Yeah. Richard, a U.S. Marine, kills a person in the Bronx while driving drunk. Is this murder or not? Oh, a lot of yeses.
Yes.
Okay. So this, ready for this? In 2000, this would not be considered murder. Okay, because this was basically unintentional. So this would be like manslaughter. Richard would be held accountable, but now we have stricter drunk driving laws. Okay. So this is something that the judicial branch has kind of decided this is going to be more like murder. Okay. So our judicial branch over time has changed it. Yeah, it's definitely his fault, right? But many people back in history and even now may say, no, this was an accident. He didn't intend to murder someone. All right. Next one. Melissa, a single mother of 3, has gotten pregnant again and decided to abort a 24-week or a 6-month fetus. Is this murder? No, 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 no. No with some dots. But kinda. No, but sad. I'm not sure. Okay. This is the abortion argument, right? This is a complicated thing. All right. Certain people feel that this may be murder. Certain people would feel that it's not. This is a very tricky situation. So the judicial branch is constantly coming across situations like this. All right. Yeah, we'll get into the abortion debate, I think, a little bit later on in this class, but I'm giving you that example of how, laws can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Let's do one more here. Jennifer finds out that her son's stepfather is sexually abusing her 5-year-old son. Jennifer kills the stepfather for this action. Is this murder? Some yeses, some no's. All right. So I actually love the chat box for this lesson because this really goes to show you how tricky each situation is, right? Janari says, yes, but he kind of deserves it. And yes, he does. But is it murder? Right? Does Jennifer go away to jail for a long time for this? These are the tricky situations that the judicial branch is constantly dealing with. So every branch of government is difficult, but the judicial branch has the tough job of figuring out if the laws are constitutional or not. So what happens is, okay, and this is the key thing, the judicial branch takes a situation and a law and sets an example. All right, so let's go back to scenario 4. Prior to 1973, Melissa could have gotten into big trouble for this. Understood? But since a Supreme Court case, which is called Roe v. Wade, which you'll learn about, now Melissa won't get in trouble to this. Okay? We use the one here, the driving drunk thing. Richard may not have gotten as much trouble until the courts have stepped in and said a little bit more of a change. So the judicial branch, okay, at this point, goes through a huge thing. All right. The last thing we're going to do is the zoom in on the executive branch. Okay. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on the executive branch. Now, I want to just say a couple things. and remind you, we're not finishing today's lesson. So what's literally going to happen is you guys, what do you guys have next period? Let me just start with that. Lunch. Okay. So here's what I'm going to say. You are free to go to lunch at 11:07. I'm not going to stop you. No problem with it. I'm going to keep teaching until I'm fully done with the lesson because I want to leave it on my YouTube channel for anyone that needs to go back to it. So if you want to leave at 11:07, you will not have any points taken off. It won't be any bit of an issue, but we have some more of the lesson. Remember, this is your double period Monday, so you're always going to have to do a little bit more work. If you want to do it later at 5 p.m., at 6 p.m., I don't care. I have no problem with that. I just want to give you a heads up. All right, so if you do decide to leave at 11:07, got no issue. If you would like to stay and just get it over with and just eat a little bit later or eat while I'm teaching, that's fine too. All right, the last thing is the executive branch. Okay, now this is the branch of government that has developed in strength over time. Okay, but let's look at some of the major roles. Okay, first and foremost, okay, the executive branch is led by the president and the vice president. Okay, and then you're going to have groups of people called the cabinet. And the cabinet members are people that are appointed by the president who work under the president. And we'll talk more about this when we get to George Washington and what the cabinet really means. Okay, but this particular branch of government is really led by the president. Everyone reports to the president. Even though the president doesn't make every single decision, he makes the final decision. So whether you're the vice president or whether you're the people in the cabinet, okay, you're going to all report to the president. So let's just quickly go through what the cabinet is, and we'll go through this a lot more. The presidents realize they have to do a lot of different things in our country, and we'll see this with the next couple of slides. But the president will pretty much realize that they are not an expert. Okay, they are not an expert on the roles and responsibilities, okay, of every single thing in our country. So our first president, George Washington, right? He was a great military leader. The guy didn't know anything about farming, though. Knew nothing. All right? So you don't want a guy that knows nothing about farming to make decisions dealing with issues for the farmers, right? So he hired what's called a Secretary of Agriculture, okay? President Trump is a good example. The guy's never been a teacher, has never worked in education, right? So he hired a Secretary of Education. There are people that are more experts in their field and will report directly to the president to make final decisions. All right. So let's go through the major roles. The executive branch, their major role is to enforce the law or to enforce a rule in our country and to make sure the law is being followed. All right. So let's say a law came out that said slavery is abolished. Okay. The president's job is to make sure that all the states and all of the people who are in the country are making sure that the law is being enforced. And how do you do this? Well, if you're the president, you make sure that your police and your authorities and really your military is making sure that the law is approved and making sure that it's being enforced correctly. Okay? So that is the major role. That's the first thing the president and the executive branch does. They make sure the law is being enforced and being followed. Laws mean nothing if they're not enforced, right? If I have a school rule that says you're not allowed to chew gum in class and people chew gum all the time and I don't say anything, that's not me enforcing the rule. All right, so you need to make sure the law is being enforced to make sure that it's effective. Okay? The next thing, the president, and this is one of the major roles that they have. They are the leader of the military. Okay, they command and they lead the military. Okay, and they are in control of it. Okay, another major thing is, and we'll learn about foreign policy more, but they are the leader of the foreign policy. So they have relationships with other countries. They make sure that those relationships are good and safe and making sure we're trying to avoid getting into a war. Now, the president does a lot of other things, but these are the major things, and these are the ones that come up the most on the Regents. All right, so when I ask you the trick question, who runs the military, and you want to say the generals, it's not. It's the president. The president makes all final military decisions with, of course, the advice of his or her generals. All right. What are the major checks? Well, one of them we've seen already is if they don't like a law, they could veto a bill, all right, and keep it from becoming a law. And another thing that has happened a lot recently is they can have a check on the judicial branch. They can basically appoint people they believe are good Supreme Court justices, okay, in the Supreme Court. And I don't know if I mentioned this with the judicial branch. I'm sorry. In our Supreme Court, I'll just put this in the chat if you want to just add this. Supreme Court has 9 Supreme Court judges. What they're really called is justices. In the chat, why do you have 9? Why not 10? Why not 8? Why 9? Why do you have 9 Supreme Court judges? Going back to the judicial branch. Sorry about this. Just forgot to mention this. Ah, Moise, excellent. So it's odd. Okay, there can't be a tie. If the Supreme Court is the final decision in our country, right? You can never have our final decision on an issue be a tie. All right, so if it's uneven, it's going to be ending up voting one or another way. Okay, so very good, guys. Okay. So let's go to this. Try this quick Regents question. Just throw it in the chat when you know it. In the United States government, members of the cabinet are directly responsible to the who? Four. Excellent. Moving on. All right. So here's one thing I have to do here. All right. I got to refresh this. Let's hope this doesn't ruin anything. Okay. This is one of those things you maybe want to write in your notebook, but if you could squeeze it into the executive branch, that's fine too. Okay. So as a teacher, and for you guys, this is probably something you understand too. I am more than just a teacher. Okay. So right now you have me in my teacher mode. Okay. Me being a teacher. But that's not the only thing I do. Okay. So when I leave being a teacher, after this, I'm going to go and be a coach. Okay. I have to do some stuff for coaching. So I have to put on my coaching hat, so to speak. All right, so right now I'm wearing my teaching hat. I'm being a teacher for you guys. After this, I'm going to go be a coach, okay? After that, I'm going to come home, have dinner, okay, with the wife, and I'm going to wear my husband hat, okay, and act a little bit differently than I would. I'm not going to be a teacher when I'm being a husband sort of thing. And then after that, not going to lie, probably going to play maybe a video game or two a little bit later. So I'm going to be going into a different role. All right. Later this week, I have a football game, so I'm going to be playing in a football game. I'm going to be wearing a different hat. All right. So you guys are doing the same thing. Okay. When I say hats, Justin, they are figurative. You're just changing the way you're acting and changing the way you are, and you're changing your role depending on the situation you're in. So right now, you guys are wearing your student hats. Okay. You may go do something later where you have to do something for your family or do something for your brother or sister, and you're acting a lot differently. You're not acting as a student in that point. So our president has many different hats that they have to wear. And this is why being a president is so tough, because they don't just do one thing. Okay. They have to do a lot of different things. So what you're going to do is you're going to write down numbers 1, 2, and 4. Okay. And we're going to talk about what this means. Okay. So first and foremost, our president is going to be our chief executive. And when you're a chief, you're a leader. All right. So they are going to be the head of the executive branch of government. Okay. So what that means is the president is the main person enforcing or carrying out a nation's laws. If they don't carry out and enforce the laws, they are not doing a good job as our chief executive. And when students ask me all the time, who is the best president, or who was the worst president, or is Barack Obama a good president, or is Donald Trump a good president? It's a very complicated question to answer because there's so many different things that they do. One president can be an excellent chief executive, but then be a horrible commander-in-chief. Another president can be an excellent commander-in-chief, but be a horrible chief legislature. So understand that they have different roles and different responsibilities. Okay? So the president has many different roles. That's why the job is so tough. Okay? The biggest one that comes up in the Regents by far is the word commander in chief. When there is a military situation, or whenever the military is used, or there's a dispute, or there's a war, okay, the president's going to act as a commander in chief. So they are the leader of our armed forces. They can use the military, obviously, when we go to war, but they also could use the military for other reasons. Okay, maybe there's a rebellion, maybe there's a riot. The military could be brought in to stop that. And we'll see George Washington do that in a few days, okay, when a rebellion does break out. Okay, because the Constitution gives the executive branch and the president a lot more power than the Articles of Confederation. And using that power as commander in chief is one of the big things. Okay? But please keep in mind, only Congress can declare war. But when Congress does declare war, they're giving the power to the executive branch president to run there. So then you'll see things like the chief of party. So they're the leader of the political party. So right now, Donald Trump's the president. He's also the leader of the Republican Party. Don't worry about that one for now. Another thing is chief diplomat. They are the person that the president, they're going to go speak to other world leaders. So we have to trust our president to go speak to other world leaders and try and work out negotiations and peace deals there. All right. And the other thing that you're writing down, the last thing you're writing down is chief legislature. All right. So they're the proposer of the legislative agenda. Essentially, ladies and gentlemen, they can propose laws. They can veto laws. So nothing gets through without the president approving it. So even though the legislative branch is voting on the laws, they have to officially approve it. Okay? And then they'll do things like the chief of state and chief citizen. So at this point, it's 11:07. Some people I've seen have left. If you want to go, that's fine. I'm going to continue teaching whether there's 2 people here or 44 people here. And then this will obviously be posted on YouTube if you do want to leave early. But I only got like 10, 15 minutes left, so I don't think it's too bad to wait if you want
Mr.
it.
Panyo, I have a question.
Yeah.
Like for the leaders of the executive branch, I'm a bit confused because you named like the president, the vice president, the cabinet members. Are they all leaders of the branch, or is only the president?
Okay, so for the executive branch, the president is the main leader, but then you have obviously some smaller leaders as well. Like you have the principal in our school, and then of course the assistant principals. So it's the same type of concept. Martinez makes the full decisions, final decision, but it doesn't like Miss Reed and Miss Katechis don't have power and people like that. Okay. So Lizmel, you just needed to copy down 1, 2, and 5, and that's it. You don't have to do all of these. We're going to move on. Okay. You didn't finish? To the diagram. I didn't finish copying. What diagram? What diagram? This diagram. Muhammad, let me know what you mean by that. We are going to go on to this here. All right. Hats the president's wears. Okay. So which action illustrates the president's power as commander-in-chief? Anytime you see commander-in-chief and the president's acting as commander-in-chief, they are going to be doing number 1, ordering American troops into a foreign country. Okay? Let me see one thing here. Okay? Next one here. When President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent troops into Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957, he was fulfilling his presidential role as a correct answer here. When you're bringing the troops in, excellent. Okay, you're doing 1 because you're bringing the troops in, so that's going to be that correct answer. And then it's also going to be, he's also going to be the chief executive because he's also enforcing the law. Okay. So this is going to be a quick setup lesson tomorrow. It's going to be a quick 5-6 minute video. And then we will be done for the day for you guys. All right. So, the Electoral College. Now, this is something that's going to be a little bit complicated, but I need to just start off by saying this. So, there's no notes to copy down, so your note taking is done for the rest of the day. However, there is. I'm looking at my other screen because I want to see. If I do this tomorrow. Okay, so there is one more slide after this. I do apologize. All right, there is one more slide after this. All right, so take a look at this YouTube video. I'm not sure if you realize this, but the people don't technically elect the president. The president gets elected by what's called the Electoral College. So we're going to watch this video, okay? And then we're going to kind of break down some of the things here that go along with it. So this is what actually elects the president. And for those that don't realize, we have a presidential election in the next couple of...
You're switching back to work mode or school mode. Optimum sets you up for success with 300 meg internet.
Okay, so we have a presidential election on November 3rd, less than 3 weeks away, okay? And this is kind of how the president gets elected at this point. They use something called the Electoral College. All right, so this video is going to be a setup video for tomorrow. All right, once we go through it, I'll say a couple things, and then you'll be done. That's your dad's birthday? Yeah, it's an interesting day to have a birthday. Okay, so Maheen, great question. People do give their vote, and they do give what's called their popular vote, but the popular vote does not actually win the presidential election. We are going to have our election won by the president through what's called the electoral vote. Okay, and we'll kind of break this down from the video, and I'll stop and talk about some things as this goes on.
Article 2, Section 1.
Jesus, did not share? Hold on, okay. Just, you missed the first 10 seconds. Okay, there we go. All good now, right?
Most people have heard of the Electoral College during presidential election years. But what exactly is the Electoral College? Simply said, it is a group of people appointed by each state who formally elect the president and vice president of the United States. To understand how this process began and how it continues today, we can look at the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. It specifies how many electors each state is entitled to have. Since 1964, there have been 538 electors in each presidential election. How do they decide on the number 538? Well, the number of electors is equal to the total voting membership of the United States Congress, 435 representatives plus 100 senators and 3 electors from the District of Columbia. Essentially, the Democratic candidate and Republican candidate are each trying to add up the electors in every state so that they surpass 270 electoral votes, or just over half of 538 votes, and win the presidency.
Okay, so let me explain something here. Your vote matters to win your district or your elector, basically. So what happens is you're trying to win your state, okay? The way a state votes and the popular vote, so let's say in this election coming up, let's say 55% of the people in New York vote for Biden and 45% vote for Trump. We'll just say numbers like that. That means we're going to get all of New York State's electoral votes to go to Joe Biden. Okay? So each state, depending on their representation, gets the vote. So gets those votes. So the more representation you have, the more electoral votes that you have at this particular point in time. So in this case, New York, I think we have 29 electoral votes. We have 27 people in our House of Representatives, and we have 2 senators. Therefore, we get 29 electoral votes. Okay? So basically, each state has these electoral votes, and that's what the president's going for. So are they going for your vote? Absolutely. But your vote actually doesn't elect the president. The electoral vote does. So it's a little bit tricky.
So how do states even get electoral votes? Each state receives a particular number of electors based on population size. The census is conducted every 10 years, so every time the census happens, states might gain or lose a few electoral votes. Let's say you're a voter in California, a state with 55 electoral votes. If your candidate wins in California, they get all 55 of the state's electoral votes. If your candidate loses, they get none. This is why many presidential candidates want to win states like Texas, Florida, and New York. If you currently add up the electoral votes of those 3 states, you would have 96 electoral votes. Even if a candidate won North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and West Virginia, they would only gain 31 electoral votes total from those 8 states. Here's where it can get a little tricky. On a rare occasion, like in the year 2000, someone can win the popular vote but fail to gain 270 electoral votes. This means that the winner may have won and collected their electoral votes by small margins, winning just enough states with just enough electoral votes, but the losing candidate may have captured large voter margins in the remaining states. If this is the case, the very large margins secured by the losing candidate in the other states would add up to over 50% of the ballots cast nationally. Therefore, the losing candidate may have gained more than 50% of the ballots cast by voters, but failed to gain 270 of the electoral votes. Some critics of the Electoral College argue the system gives an unfair advantage to states with large numbers of electoral votes. Think of it this way. It is possible for a candidate to not get a single person's vote, not one vote, in 39 states or the District of Columbia, yet be elected president by winning the popular vote in just 11 of these 12 states: California, New York, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Georgia, or Virginia. This is why both parties pay attention to these states. However, others argue that the Electoral College protects small states such as Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and even geographically large states with small populations, like Alaska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. That's because a candidate can't completely ignore small states, because in a close election, every electoral vote counts.
All right, so a big debate we'll have, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, is should the president be elected by just the amount of votes? If a president gets 52% of the votes, then they should be the president. The big argument is, and the video is kind of saying, is if you just went on the popular vote and just went by the people that did that, then you wouldn't have to campaign in close to 40 states out of the 50, because essentially you're just going to go for the states where there's big populations, like New York, like Texas, like California, like Florida, because those are the only states you really need to win the election. So the Electoral College kind of ensures that everyone in every single state does have representation and does have a vote in the presidential election.
There are certain states that have a long history of voting for a particular party. These are known as safe states. For the past 4 election cycles, in 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2008, Democrats could count on states like Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Massachusetts, whereas the Republicans could count on states like Mississippi, Alabama, Kansas, and Idaho. States that are teetering between parties are called swing states. In the past 4 election cycles, Ohio and Florida have been swing states, twice providing electoral votes for a Democratic candidate and twice providing electoral votes for a Republican candidate. Think about it. Do you live in a safe state? If so, is it a Democratic or Republican safe state? Do you live in a swing state? Are your neighboring states swing or safe? Is the population in your state increasing or decreasing? And do not forget, when you're watching the electoral returns on election night every 4 years and the big map of the United States is on the screen, know that the magic number is 270 and start adding.
Yeah, Maheen, it's very ironic. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so we're going to talk more about the Electoral College tomorrow. I just needed to have this as a setup lesson. For tomorrow, we will go into why the Electoral College is good or bad. We'll go into the controversy with it. And then we'll look at some times where the executive branch has had a differing leader based on the Electoral College vote. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So at this point, just take a second. You're going to have to turn in your notes by the end of the period. And then end of the day. And that's it. Okay, all I'm checking is to make sure that you stay with me this period. It should be a very easy grade. So I appreciate you 23 people that stayed. Okay, everyone else will have to go watch it on YouTube later, so you guys do not have to. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys, I guess, tomorrow. Fourth period or first. I'm not quite sure yet. Have a great day.